Thanks. Good evening, everybody. Thank you all for being here today. Just in ways of introduction, my name is Badri Raj. I'm the CTO of a company called TokBox, and TokBox is a fully owned subsidiary of a large Spanish telecommunications company, Telefonica. And so what we do is we work on a platform and a product called OpenTok, which is a cloud-based API and service for application developers to sort of integrate real-time communication experiences into your application. And so what I'd like to talk about today is a little bit about how to use WebRTC to build rich, engaging fintech applications. And what I'd like to leave you all with is sort of a little flavor in terms of how real-time communications is sort of changing the workflows and transforming the way fintech applications and engagements are being built. And as I mentioned before, being a platform provider, we have a fairly good vantage point in terms of trying to see what are the movements in the market and what kind of events are happening in the landscape. And I think there's something really interesting which is happening with respect to real-time communication across the board, all the more so with fintech. But before I jump into that, maybe a quick straw poll. How many people in the audience have actually physically walked into your local bank branch in the last month? Few, not very many people, right? And I think about that for a minute, right? While technology has enabled a whole bunch of efficiencies and convenience and brought it to banking, really more and more customers are consuming services in much more automated fashion, whether it's on machines, whether it's on mobile apps, or whether it's ATMs or what have you. And I think one of the fundamental questions it's useful to sort of to ponder about is, in a world where people are increasingly consuming these services online and digital workflows, how do you engage with your customers in new and meaningful ways? And really, I think we are at the brink of a major shift. I was going to say revolution, but then I thought that would be too dramatic, so I will say we are at the brink of a major shift. And really, that shift, for the most part, is being driven by this technology called WebRTC. And I use the word banking here because that's the example I started out with, but pretty much the same set of challenges are faced across the board in the financial services sector. Again, since I apparently like straw polls, how many people here know what WebRTC is or have heard of it? Well, that's a fair population. But for people who don't know what WebRTC is, at a very high level, it's a series of standards and protocols which enable plug-in-free, browser-to-browser, peer-to-peer communication, right? And you can think about it as fundamental building blocks, which are built into the browser, which enable real-time communication, whether it's audio, video, or messaging. And really, these components can be accessed through simple JavaScript interfaces, right? So for the first time, this becomes natively part of HTML5. And really, I think, and I'm strongly convinced that WebRTC represents one of the most meaningful breakthroughs in communications in the last decade. And the whole reason that's the case is this is the first time communications is a first-class citizen, which is sort of built into the browser and enabled by very easy-to-use APIs. And you might ask, that's all great. What does that got to do with fintech applications? But before I actually delve into that, I think I would like to delve a little bit about the nature of this communication shift, because I think there are these fundamental characteristics which define the new wave of real-time communication on the web. And I think it's mostly defined by a few set of characteristics. And the first thing is, all new real-time communications is fully embedded. If you look at the old world, if I want to call somebody, I need to pick up my phone and dial a phone number, or log into Skype and call somebody on Skype, or log into open WhatsApp and send somebody a message. If you really think about it, we always lived in the world of sort of siloed communication applications. But in the new world, communication should just be a feature of an application. I shouldn't have to use a new application. It's a feature of the workflow I already existed in. And so I think the first thing is real-time communication going forward is going to be very sort of embedded. And the second thing, which is sort of a related concept, is that real-time communication experiences are going to be seamless. And I often give the example of, and I'm sure all of you are probably like uber familiar with this, is back in the old days, or when you went through the merchant, in an e-commerce site, when you went through the merchant flows, and you had to pay using PayPal, you got basically booted out, you finished your transaction elsewhere, then you get plugged in back into the workflow. While that works, it's kind of not the best and most seamless user experience. And then APIs like Stripe basically made that entire experience much more seamless and in context. And if you really think about it, there's no reason why the same thing shouldn't happen for real-time communication experience. Real-time communication experiences should be seamless and built into the native app experience. I shouldn't have to leave the app and dial a phone number or call somebody on Skype or send a text message or send emails. And seamlessness is a much broader concept. I think one needs to worry about seamless experiences across a whole bunch of environments and device types, right? Seamlessness also applies to dynamic network conditions. So I think the new era of real-time communication is also seamless. I think the third sort of defining characteristic of what is happening in the market is contextuality. We build intelligent applications on the web or on mobile devices. It has a lot of context. There's no reason why that context is sort of the next level of personalization. There is no reason why that context cannot be bubbled into the workflow. For instance, when you call an insurance company or whatever, there's nothing more annoying than somebody asking you to repeat order numbers and social security like digits over and over again. That context exists in the workflow, right? And I jokingly sometimes also say that we are in the world of bring your own applications. We've moved beyond BYOD. And in a world of APIs and services, people want to be able to accomplish what they want to do natively within applications and not have the barrier of having to shift across these different application boundaries. The other thing I would also stress is that identities are valuable. Identities and user relationships are valuable in the financial services sector. And to some degree, right now we live in the world where identities are strongly coupled with communication devices. I have a phone number which identifies me on WhatsApp. I have a Gmail account which I'm used to identify in Google Hangouts, or I have a Skype ID. But really, what we see is a movement where you want to decouple identities and own the identities yourself as any organization, right? And finally, I think, and this is sort of a salient point, mobile is sort of exploding in terms of the landscape, but really, services need to be endpoint agnostic. This is a chart which basically shows and projects across PCs, tablets, smartphones, and other IoT devices what the number of connected devices will be available in 2019. That's 7 billion WebRTC-enabled endpoints are expected to go live in 2019. And really, in this new world, you want to be able to deliver your services sort of seamlessly to all these endpoints. So really, the new era of real-time communication is embedded, it's contextual, it is seamless, and it's endpoint agnostic. And coming to the question of how exactly does this fit into the financial services sector, what I'd like to do is go through a bunch of interesting use cases which we have seen people in the industry build, and maybe talk a little bit about that to give you a flavor of how real-time communication is actually transforming these workflows. The first one is Royal Bank of Scotland. Increasingly in this sort of crowded marketplace, people are always striving to have new and improved ways of managing a relationship and your brand identity with customers, right? In this case, the Royal Bank of Scotland identified a gap that existed between face-to-face meetings and telephone conversations relationship managers were having with their clients. This is a wealth management use case where they basically recognize the fact that filling that void between pure face-to-face meetings and telephone conversations using highly engaging real-time communication experiences actually adds a lot of value and engagement. Here's a very simple example where there's an app from RBS where this is run by Coutts Bank. They use it to connect high net worth individuals with the relationship, with the customer service managers they have a relationship with. And if I'm not physically available to have a face-to-face meeting, I will be able to dial in and have a face-to-face video call. And not only that, there are all these collaboration features which are built in where my wealth advisor can pull in other sorts of content to structure the conversation around. This is sort of an example of how collaboration, sort of embedded seamless flow, identity management and security sort of all come together where real-time communications enhance a workflow. Another simple example, which we have seen in the past, is this company called Bulls on Wall Street. It's an interesting company, and what they do is they are a trading education website where you could basically sign up for a boot camp and get access to sort of trading content and educational materials. And not only that, they've also built a collaborative sort of application where people can trade together, collaboratively get feedback, and sort of use that as a learning and as a collaborative tool. And if you actually think about it, they have used real-time communication to not only distribute the media and set up a new and novel way to sort of engage and distribute content, the entire collaboration bit is also centered around interesting real-time communication technologies. Can a bunch of people like trade together, see what they're trading, share notes, annotate the screen? There's a bunch of interesting features which have been built here. And somebody in my company jokingly says, it's got an element of truth that this will be the future of CNBC. Across verticals, whether it's gaming and Twitch TV or whether it's user-generated content and it's YouTube, more and more people are consuming media and content on the web with respect to other traditional channels. And these are interesting ways by which real-time communications is used to sort of deliver that content, but not only deliver that content, but build a very rich sort of interactive experience centered around that content itself. Another interesting example is Esurance. Esurance basically used real-time communication and WebRTC to build an application which drove a lot of optimizations in terms of the claims process. Let's say I got into an accident. I can basically use my mobile device. I can open my Esurance app. I can seamlessly connect to an agent on the spot, a claims representative. I can switch to my back-facing camera and basically show the representative, what has happened on the field. And the agent on the other side can basically walk me through the claims process and also tell me what areas I would need to document. Do I need to take photographs, more detailed photographs of my bumper or what have you, right? And it essentially introduces a whole bunch of efficiency in terms of, not just centered around the claims process where there's not the right level of documentation or what have you. Here's a simple example of a see what I see use case. And you could easily extend this to a whole bunch of other interesting verticals as well. And I have some time, so I'll quickly run through some additional use cases as well. And the list goes on and on and on. Here's an example of identity management. Oftentimes, when you're creating an account or when you're acquiring new users, proof of ID in signing up for a new account is sort of a big deal. And you want to reduce that barrier to entry where you get people to schedule a visit to an actual physical location where you can identify their IDs. And a lot of people are using real-time communication in new and novel ways for identity management. You could basically schedule a video call with an agent, and you can show them your passport, your driver's license. And there's image processing software which can basically verify the authenticity of that document, and you can take a snapshot of that image for compliance reasons. Again, it's sort of an interesting way real-time communication is used to solve certain traditional problems which currently exist in financial services workflows. Equivalently, retail banking. I think there's a lot of work happening around, how do you optimize retail banking and, how do you extend that customer relationship experience? And, you could easily think of use cases where an ATM kiosk could have a video call button where I'm directly connected to a representative who will walk me through any issues I have. And we see a lot of use cases centered around retail banking as well in terms of using real-time communication to drive efficiencies, but also engage with the customer in sort of interesting ways and drive down resolution times. Fourthly, this is what I broadly bucket into consultative services, and we see this in mortgage lending and places like that, where oftentimes people get their loan documents and all of that, and it's useful to talk to a representative who can walk me through the process and maybe explain to me various clauses as I'm electronically signing this document, and the entire transaction can be recorded for compliance reasons. And so I think there's a bunch of very interesting use cases across the board where real-time communication is sort of really changing the way, in certain cases radically transforming, in certain cases complementing existing workflows in sort of very interesting ways. And that was sort of a broad series of use cases. What I'd like to stress also is in terms of financial services applications, WebRTC is a technology. It is not a solution. It is a building block which enables you to build interesting use cases. But really, there's a lot of work and thinking that needs to go around sort of designing the entire experience. I think I've listed out some of the things which will be useful to think about. If any of you are sort of contemplating real-time communication into your application, it's obviously security. Compliance and auditing, when you have real-time communication, audio and video, it introduces new and interesting sort of challenges in terms of how you comply, how you archive, how you store, how you prevent, how you satisfy your regulatory obligations. User experiences for RTC is a difficult problem. Real-time communication experiences are not something you just bolt onto your application as an afterthought. I think in order to be truly seamless, it needs to be well thought out from the get-go. Delivery to new endpoints, mobile endpoints, non-browser endpoints. WebRTC, as it's designed today, is mostly a web-centric piece of technology. And it's important to sort of think about how do you deliver your service to a whole slew of endpoints in a very device-agnostic way. Legacy systems, what do you do when you have to interact with your existing contact center solution or your existing legacy system? Network adaptation. This is something a lot of people don't think about, but real-time communication is extremely latency sensitive, right? If you're implementing a customer interaction workflow, it's extremely important that interaction be the best quality experience it can be. And that means thinking about, if a person's moving around with a mobile phone or is in a bad Wi-Fi environment, some sort of a bad network environment, how do you do adaptation? And finally, multi-party. Multi-party is what I loosely call as conferencing, right? What kind of topologies do you need to think about as you go through these use cases? So I've sort of come to the end of my talk, but what I'd like to leave you all with is that real-time communications is here to stay. And it is radically transforming a whole bunch of verticals and workflows, including financial services. And coupled with that, customer behavior is also rapidly changing in terms of consumers and customers' expectations about wanting to consume more services online and wanting to consume those services in a much more easy and seamless way. And finally, all of this is causing a whole bunch of traditional models to be challenged. So I highly encourage all of you to sort of, think about real-time communications in the context of your digital workflows to figure out how you can add value to your customers. Thank you very much, and that is pretty much the end of my talk. If you have any questions, I have 46 seconds, or I'm going to be hanging around. We have a booth. I'm happy to sort of talk to you guys in greater detail. Thank you so much.
Okay, we do have a couple questions.
Yeah.
We can eat into the time a little bit. Can this be used for real-time chat for support, non-video?
Absolutely. So when I say WebRTC, it's a real-time communication technology which enables any sort of media transfer, whether it's audio, video, or data. and messaging is a form of data transfer, so it can absolutely be used for text chat.
Okay, great. And one more. What do you do technically to ensure signal clarity, connection quality?
That's a tough question. So there's a whole bunch of algorithms which we implement under the covers and which WebRTC itself natively implements. I'll keep it short and say there's a bunch of techniques in terms of how you can detect your media quality and then throttle the entire experience. Sometimes, if I'm viewing something on a mobile device in very small resolution, there is no reason for me to consume a 5 megabit stream. Or if I'm in a very bad spotty network, I can maybe turn off my video temporarily, fall back to audio only, and maybe then upgrade once things become better. There's a bunch of interesting sort of strategies to deal with network adaptation.